Zekrom is coming to 5-star raids in Pokemon Go starting on Tuesday, June 16th at 6 p.m. local time. In this video, we're going to take a look at the best counters that you should use to take down this legendary Pokemon as quickly as possible, as well as its place in the PvE as well as PvP meta. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the channel, trainers. My name is Oro Chris. I am your catching coach. If you are new to the channel, welcome. If you are interested in Pokemon Go, competitive PvP, and basically anything Pokemon related, consider subscribing. We really appreciate it. But as far as Zekrom is concerned, we've got Zekrom coming in at a very impressive 4,038 CP. Slightly attack weighted, as we can see here on the graph. And as far as movesets are concerned, it's currently got in the Game Master Dragon Breath and Charge Beam as potential fast moves, and then Outrage and Wild Charge as the recommended charge moves as far as PvE content is concerned. And when we say PvE, we're talking about player versus enemy. That's things like raiding and gym attacking. When we say PvP, we're talking about player versus player. That's a different kind of an in-game mechanic that's consisting of Team Go Rocket battles as well as Go Battle League and trainer battles generally. But as far as additional moves, it also has access to Crunch and Flash Cannon. So 4 available charge moves for this particular Pokemon. As we mentioned, this is a Dragon and Electric type Pokemon. Typical counters for Dragon types are going to be Dragon types themselves, as well as Fairy and Ice type attacks. As far as electric types are concerned, electric types are only weak to ground type attacks. So those 4 types are what we're going to be looking for as far as counters are concerned against this particular Pokemon. Now I'm here on GamePress.gg, and we have got the raid counters damage per second on one side of this graph, and then TDO, total damage output, along the x-axis of the graph. And as we can see, as has occurred in the past couple of raids, we looked at Latios and Latias, as well as Reshiram. And each time we've had a Shadow Salamence and a Shadow Dragonite leading the pack in terms of overall damage. That Shadow buff providing a 20% boost to the attacking power of those Pokemon. No such thing as a free lunch, also taking a 20% reduction in their defenses. But the Shadow boost on these Pokemon hitting for super effective with those powerful Dragon-type attacks like Dragon Tail and Outrage. This particular Salamence is going to be running the Legacy moveset from Community Day, that being Outrage. They're going to be leading the pack in terms of damage per second. So if you want to take this Pokemon down as quickly as possible, get those damage balls, be focusing on potentially powering up a Shadow Dragon for this raid. If you're not interested in redefining or reimagining your Dragon type counters, the traditional True Blue Rayquaza as well as Salamence going to be leading the pack in terms of raw DPS for Dragon types. If you're more concerned with total damage output, as we can see here further along to the right of the graph, those ground types, especially Garchomp going to have a 3 times resistance to electric type attacks. Ground types have 2 times resistance. That is what we call in Pokemon Go immunity tier resistance. In the main series games, ground types take no damage unless there's some unique circumstance at play. Ground types take no damage from an electric type attack. In Pokemon Go, that immunity translates to 2 times resistance. Here, Garchomp as a dragon types resist electric type attacks, and then you add in those 2 times resistances from the ground typing for Garchomp, you're now 3 times resisting these electric attacks for Zekrom. So definitely going to be leading the pack in terms of total damage output, overall solid bulk. Same with Dialga. Because of its steel typing, it's going to be resisting the steel type attack of Flash Cannon. So that is also one of the reasons that it is pushed so far to the right on the total damage output side of the scale. Similarly, with the other ground types, we can see that Groudon here is also leading the pack with that recent buff to Fire Punch. If you have not invested in a Groudon, consider it for Master League. This Pokemon, you don't need Fire Punch in this particular raid, but in Master League, that is one Pokemon that's going to be well worth your investment and use of an Elite TM. It's going to be a solid one. But as far as other ground types to be looking for, Excadrill, Rhyperior, and then Garchomp, as we mentioned, going to be top picks for this particular raid. Now, with regard to this raid, this is one particular Pokemon that you may want to reconsider what team you're running depending on the weather, as well as what moveset the raid Pokemon has. If it's running dragon type attacks, it may be worth considering running a ground type team, especially if it has electric type attacks. A ground type team may be more beneficial as far as reserving or saving potions and revives. If it's running flash cannon, throw in a Dialga. If it's running crunch, then go with your best DPS options, because nothing's really going to be resisting the crunch damage. So go with the dragons and then whatever else you need to flesh out the remainder of your team. As far as a raid duo, there are several Pokemon that can reach the level of DPS that you need in order to duo a Zekrom. In order to do that, you're going to need a rough DPS of about 25 damage per second during the course of the raid. So the Shadow Salamence, Shadow Dragonite, they're able to pull it off. Rayquaza, Salamence, the Shadow Weavile with access to the ice type attacks could be hitting for super effective. That's also a potential option, as well as Shadow Gardevoir. After that point, to flesh out the remainder of your team, Dragonite comes real close to that 25 that we need, Zekrom itself, as well as Garchomp. You can use those Pokemon to flesh out the remainder of your team to push up the limits of that DPS that you're going to need to pull off the duo. Now, as far as Zekrom's place in the PvE meta, as an electric type, it is looking very solid as a potential option. I have selected Tornadus Incarnate form as a potential target just to evaluate. One, electric types are used primarily to hit flying types for super effective damage, as well as water types for super effective damage. So as far as potential options against a flying type target, not considering something that has dual typing that might throw things off, Tornadus, pure flying. Ranking these Pokemon by DPS, against Tornadus, we can see that Galarian Darmanitan, now this is Zen mode form, not yet in-game. We covered Galarian Darmanitan, the non-Zen mode form, in a recent video. I'll put a link to that up above. But past Galarian Darmanitan Zen mode form, we've got several of the Shadow Pokemon, including Shadow Electivire, Shadow Raikou, Shadow Zapdos, Shadow Magnezone, Weavile, and then the first non-Shadow Pokemon that's available in-game, we've got Rampardos. And we all know how solid Rampardos is in terms of overall DPS, an amazing attack stat, super strong moves. The next Pokemon past Rampardos, however, is Zekrom, coming in with a total DPS of 31.257. Now that number is just an illustration. It's just to show you how, in relationship to some of the other counters against a Tornadus, this Pokemon does. These numbers are unique to the Tornadus matchup. And then we have Galarian Darmanitan and Shadow Tyranitar filling out the remainder of this first page of top DPS winners. If we limit this by electric types alone, we can see that we've got those Shadow Pokemon as we mentioned, Zekrom, and then Electivire coming in 2 points below Zekrom in terms of DPS. So as far as an electric type attacker, Zekrom is looking exceptionally solid in the Pokemon Go PvE meta. Now, one thing to consider, if you have available to you these Shadow Pokemon, they are more expensive in terms of Stardust, but they're going to be cheaper, typically more readily available as far as candy is concerned. So if you're looking for an electric type attacker to add to your squad, are you more interested in preserving your Stardust? Then potentially go with Zekrom. If you're more concerned with the lack of candy for a fresh legendary like Zekrom is going to be, then potentially go with the Shadow Pokemon like Shadow Electivire or Shadow Magnezone. As far as a dragon type attacker, I have chosen Haxorus as our potential target. The reason being it's a mono dragon type, and dragon is only super effective into a dragon type. So we're going to try to evaluate how does this Pokemon particularly fare against the other potential targets into dragons, those being fairy types as well as ice type attacks. So as we can see, we have got Shadow Salamence leading the pack, Galarian Darmanitan Zen mode form, again, not in game yet. Coming in at number 2, Shadow Dragonite available, Black Kyurem and White Kyurem. Those are Pokemon that are also not yet available. We covered those forms previously in a video discussing Reshiram and some June events. I will put a link up to that video up above. Then we have Salamence, the first non-shadow Pokemon that is in-game coming in as far as DPS is concerned. Now this is Legacy Salamence. You need to have the Community Day move of Outrage. Then we have Shadow Weavile, Haxorus, his or herself, and then we have Zekrom. So as far as DPS is concerned, Zekrom also looking very solid as a potential Dragon type attacker as well. Again, to succeed as a Dragon type in Pokemon Go, you really need to have Outrage. That is the most important aspect. This Pokemon has Dragon Breath. That is the second tier fast move as far as dragon damage is concerned. Dragon Tail would have been the preferred available move for that Pokemon, but it has access to Dragon Breath, but that is enough to keep it as a top Dragon type counter. As far as PvP is concerned, let's head over to pvpoke.com to see how Zekrom exactly ranks against the rest of the PvP meta. So we are here at pvpoke.com looking at the Ultra League rankings. This Pokemon caught from a raid is going to be above the threshold for Great League, so it's only going to be eligible in the Ultra and Master League respectively. And Zekrom is ranked 43rd overall. So in the Ultra League, the recommended moveset for Zekrom is going to be Dragon Breath, Crunch, and Wild Charge, and it's going to have very similar performance as what we saw with Reshiram. Reshiram had the recommended moveset of Dragon Breath, Crunch, and Overheat. Here we have got Wild Charge subbing in for that Overheat position. And as we can see, the key wins, winning against most of the starters, including Venusaur, Charizard, because that dragon typing is going to provide it a very important resistance to those elemental attacks, things like Frenzy Plant or Blast Burn from Charizard. It does have a very important win against Armored Mewtwo, part of the reason being having access to Crunch. It's going to be hitting for super effective damage into those Psychic types. Armored Mewtwo, however, is not quite as strong in the Ultra League meta because Cresselia, with its recent buff to Moonblast, it is now going to be in a much stronger position in the Ultra League meta generally, winning key matchups against Giratina. And because Armored Mewtwo, the typical moveset that's recommended is Confusion, Psystrike, and Dynamic Punch, Cresselia is going to be resisting all of those attacks. And because Cresselia has become uber present in the Ultra League, Armored Mewtwo's stock is not quite as high as it was in Season 1 and preseason. But not going to be pulling out a win against Cresselia. Cresselia with the recently buffed Moonblast attack, that is just able to charge too quickly with Psycho Cut as a fast move for Cresselia, and as a result, under all shielding situations, Zekrom can't get a knockout blow, even with access to a super effective move like Crunch. Now, two particular matchups I will highlight for you in the Ultra League very briefly if you are considering it. Giratina Altered Form, as we can see, has a 574 battle rating. That means that Giratina Altered Form wins against Zekrom. But if Zekrom has a single Dragon Breath lead, those 3 energy from 1 Dragon Breath are enough to get to a second Crunch to get the knockout against Giratina Altered Form. So I wouldn't pin your entire strategy around it, but if you have Zekrom in the back and you've got a bad lead, you swap into Zekrom, get 1 Dragon Breath of energy lead as far as damage is concerned against their alternate Pokemon. They swap in their Giratina thinking that that's a winning matchup. You can swing that now in the 1 shield. Something to consider. Similarly with Giratina Origin Form, they have to land a successful shield bait with Ominous Wind. If you do not get that bait and you go for a Shadow Ball that is blocked by a shield, you will lose that matchup. That Crunch is going to be the knockout that you need for the as far as the Giratina Origin Form is concerned. So those two matchups, they are kind of close, but because of the prevalence of Cresselia and because Moonblast now has been buffed, I'm not confident that Zekrom is going to be all that strong in the Ultra League meta. As far as the Master League meta, pulling up the Master League stats, we can see that the rankings at pvpoke.com have Zekrom ranked number 1 in the Master League with a raw score of 94.5 overall. Consistency, as we can see here, 100%. Part of the reason for that consistency is Dragon Breath is just that good of a move. Factor in that Reshiram has access to those legendary stats. A 4,000 plus CP Pokemon is going to be in a great position in the Master League meta where it can make use of those huge base stat potential. And as we can see, some of the super prevalent Pokemon in the Master League, winning against Melmetal. As a Dragon type, it's going to be resisting electric type attacks. As a electric type, it's going to be resisting electric type attacks, so it's going to have immunity tier resistance to the Thunder Shock that Melmetal is bringing. Rock Slide, not going to be hitting for super effective damage. Super Power, not going to be hitting for super effective damage. So even though Melmetal is resisting the Dragon Breath damage from Zekrom, overall, Zekrom is able to pull out that win based solely upon, one, its greater stat product than Melmetal, as well as access to better overall attacks with Crunch and Wild Charge. Also pulling out a win, an important win against Giratina Origin Form. So now Giratina Origin Form not only has to fear Palkia, Dialga, Dragonite, basically any of the other dragons. Now it's got one more target on its back with Zekrom coming to the Master League. And part of the major problem for the Ghost Dragon Pokemon is going to be access to Crunch for Zekrom as well as Reshiram. That is going to be a big problem for these Pokemon in this coming up season for the Master League. And Kyogre also in a tough position here. Kyogre typically has a bad matchup with the dragons because they're resisting Waterfall. Waterfall is a very strong move overall, but because the majority of your damage is coming from your fast move damage, when it's resisted, that makes a very tough matchup for Kyogre. And then getting hit for super effective damage with Wild Charge, that is going to be a very tough situation for that particular Pokemon. And here what's most important is that Metagross is losing to this particular dragon. Part of the reason, as we mentioned, Crunch going to be hitting for super effective damage into a psychic type like Metagross, and then the steel type attacks of Metagross are going to be resisted because this particular dragon is an electric type, and electric types resist steel type attacks. So unless Metagross can land a very important Earthquake in this matchup, either because you're down shields or because they have a lead on energy, or you just think that it's a bait and it's not, Metagross is going to have a tough go of it with this particular Pokemon. Now, one thing that I will mention, even though it has access to Crunch, Mewtwo is just that good now in the Master League. If we pull up this particular match, we can see that in the one shield, Zekrom is losing, but barely losing, going out with a Psystrike, getting the knockout here as we can see, but that Crunch is fully charged, ready to go. If, like in the Ultra League matchup we just mentioned, if we add one Dragon Breath of a lead of energy, we can see that now Mewtwo is losing this matchup with the knockout going to Zekrom with 18 HP remaining. One final matchup that I will point out for your attention. Groudon. Up to this point, the ground types in the Master League have really consisted of the semi-rare Swampert and potentially Excadrill. Groudon, because up to this point it has not had a shield baiting move, with only access to really Earthquake or potentially Solar Beam, Groudon did not see much play in the Master League. But because it now has access to Fire Punch, that has completely redefined this particular Pokemon's place in the Master League meta. So now I would expect to see a lot more Groudon in the Master League, and that is going to be a tough situation for a Pokemon like Zekrom. But with an overall ranking of number 1 in the Master League, and with wins as important as these particular Pokemon, I mean, Melmetal, Kyogre, Metagross, Giratina, that is the core of the Master League meta. Now, admittedly, I know Dialga is always present, but if you pair this Pokemon with a solid Dialga counter, potentially something like Groudon, Groudon's stock is now so much higher in the Master League meta because this new Pokemon Zekrom is going to be taking super effective damage. Reshiram from a couple of weeks ago is going to be taking super effective damage as a fire type, and now Dialga, who has feared fighting types and ground types, now has another target on its back with Groudon coming up in the Master League. So, if you're considering powering up a Zekrom, be aware that you're going to have a very common weakness as Dialga. And because everyone is already targeting Dialga on their teams, carrying Pokemon like Rhyperior and now Groudon, that is going to be something that you're going to have to factor into your team building strategy. So overall, as we can see, very solid as an Electric-type attacker in the PvE scene, as well as a Dragon-type attacker. There are potentially cheaper options. Shadow Pokemon, going to be a little bit more expensive as far as Stardust is concerned, but definitely going to be cheaper as far as candy. So if you don't raid much, you don't have the rare candy to invest in a Zekrom for those particular needs, go with one of those Shadow Pokemon, something like Shadow Dragonite or potentially Shadow Electivire for a Electric or Dragon type attacker that's going to do solid DPS. As far as the PvP side of things is concerned, Zekrom in the Master League is looking exceptionally strong, but there are some concerns for it in the Master League. In Season 2, we are going to see a very different Master League meta, much more focused around Groudon. Pokemon like Rhyperior are very common, as well as Excadrill as a potentially spicy pick. Anything that is going to share a common weakness with Dialga is going to be already in a poorer position in the Master League meta because everyone has those types of counters on their team ready to counter Dialga. Zekrom is going to be sharing that common weakness, so now you're going to have to consider, do I want to have Zekrom on my squad if I've already invested in potentially a Dialga for the Master League, if you like that particular combination, but it's going to be hitting for Pokemon like Kyogre for super effective damage. So there's a lot overall to consider as far as Zekrom's place in the Master League meta. Overall, I would definitely give it a thumbs up. I'm definitely going to be raiding this Pokemon. It is going to be available in the raid hours every Wednesday local time for 3 weeks from 6 p.m. local time to 7 p.m. local time. Zekrom will be appearing in raids. So be sure to get out there, raid this Pokemon, get those rare candy, and look for a really solid IV combination because in Master League, this Pokemon is definitely going to be one that we're going to want to try out.